so I have a question session. I am going to be answering from someone. They sent me actually 16 questions. Some of these I'm going to read them, but tell you about future videos I'm going to do for them. And they wanted to remain anonymous, so I'm going to jump right in. In my line of work, we can project in advance on when we will be busy and when we will not. So we are able to staff accordingly. So my question is, as a business, how do you know how to staff on any given week? And how do you control your labor costs to make sure the staff has hours to survive, at the same time not go into overtime? These are great. This is a great question because there is a huge ebb and flow to the funeral business. We may have 10 calls one week and 0 calls the next week. You have to figure out what your baseline is. Typically, one director can handle the workload of like 75 calls a year, sometimes 100 to 125. It just depends on the radius they serve and their other support staff. So you need to know, if you're kind of laying that out, how you can function for certain call value. And if you need to have more directors on staff, or if you have a freelance person like myself around that can help in when it gets a little too busy. So you have to figure out your baseline of what support staff you need to have there if you did an average per week of what you do a year. So break it out per 52 weeks and figure out, and then what do you need for that staff. Then we also function highly on our part-time support staff. Ladies who maybe answer phones or work the doors or do removals, some of the men who work funerals and run death certificates, or gender not defined by those, but so they are more flexible. They're usually tired people, and they understand that when we're busy they get hours, when we're not they don't. So you hire people with them knowing that is the situation. And sometimes you just you get super swamped, and sometimes you have a really slow streak. So that basic service charge of a funeral home and staff is built to cover across the board for every family served. You recoup that amount per each family. So if you have a busy week, you're not charging less because you're going to be making more. And if it's a slow week, you don't charge more because you're serving less families. You charge the same to each family, and that's why a lot of people don't understand where that number comes from, but it comes to cover your overhead. How do you handle crowd control? Same. If you know it's going to be a larger service, you have more people working it. Or if you know that you're going to congest the roads, you let the police know what's going on. So maybe your local police or sheriff department can assist you. So you just gauge by what's going on, how much staffing you may need around, and how things are going to flow. If you know it's going to be a super large visitation, you don't cram it into like 1 hour before the service or 2 hours of visitation. You direct the family to plan out enough time accordingly so those people can funnel through over a longer period of time. Is there a standard amount of staff that you use on any given funeral? Every funeral home is going to be different. I have worked funerals at funeral homes where it was just me and one other person working everything, parking cars, running the service, and there was 250 people at the funeral. The next week I covered a funeral home and I had 8 people working a service for 50 people. So it depends on the funeral home and how many staff they want to call in and what their normal is. So it's kind of different across the board. Some funeral homes are becoming full-service event centers. What are your thoughts on this trend? And do you think our industry will merge into one in the future? So they're in hospitality at a resort hotel. So yeah, I think that it is great that we are diversifying. The business in itself and death care is diversifying. People want more than just a traditional burial or a direct cremation, or there's all these service options in between now. And so people want more and more options and more avenues that they can go down. They also like one-stop shopping. So if they can come to you and have a, let's say, direct cremation, but then they can also have their gathering and event at your place rather than trying to hunt down the VFW or go rent another location, you're keeping service within your revenue, but you're also assisting the family by keeping everything on site. So having catering options, having packages for hospitality type things is going to only benefit the families and allow them to see you in being a true full-rounded caregiver mode. So he also asked about startup costs for funeral homes and mortuaries, and we'll do that in a future video. I think talking over some of those financials. The average cost for a funeral, this honestly, it can't even give an average. So, like NFDA and some of the state organizations say 6,000 to 8,000, but some say 10,000. So it's all across the board because sometimes the number that's on paper includes the cemetery fees. And I've had cemetery fees that are over $3,000 just for the cemetery, but that's not the funeral home charge, that's the cemetery. So it kind of skews the numbers. So it's going to be far too great of a range to give you any specific number. How many on average does an independent funeral home do on a day and week versus how many a corporate one can do? So here's the thing. A lot of people think small funeral home, independent, large funeral home, corporate. That's not the case. Corporate funeral homes buy a lot of small funeral homes as well. So you may be out in, Podunk, Iowa, and it's like a 40, 50 call volume funeral home, but it could be corporate, where you could be in a bigger city and there's a 6 location funeral home and it's independent family run. So try and not pigeonhole those terms to large and small. Funeral homes, like smaller towns, I guess, I couldn't even tell you volume-wise of the town, but if you said a small town funeral home, usually is going to do 50 to 100 calls. Where a larger city, your call volume, you're going to have multiple locations usually, but if you did a large call volume in one building, I would say a large call volume to me would be 500 plus in one building. That's a lot in one building. Usually you branch it over multiple locations because you can't have as much going on in one building. So I guess it depends what you're calling a large volume, and I'm rambling. But it depends. You may do honestly 0 for a whole month, and then you may do 13 in 1 week. So there's just no average. There's such an influx and lulls that you hit that you can't average out. I mean, if you do 100 calls a year, you would average, 5.2? Am I doing my math right? 5.2 calls a week. But that's never going to happen that way, that you're going to get that specific of numbers. Is it common to have to bump a funeral because of scheduling conflicts? So no, you don't bump a funeral. If you have something scheduled and the next family comes in, you tell them that time slot is not available, or you move it to another location. So if you already have a funeral in your building, then you maybe recommend they do a funeral at their church or at another chapel of yours, or they do it another day. So you have your schedule in front of you. You don't bump somebody because something else comes along. You just tell the new family that something is already scheduled on certain days and times, and you schedule accordingly. So you don't bump people. How do you turn off work mode? I think just focusing on other things. A long time ago, I wasn't able to do it early in the career. I would take home the pressure of needing to do things outside of work for families, or coming in on my day off, or doing this or doing that. And I felt compelled to really put myself aside and dive in, but I found that I was also neglecting myself and my family and my friends and things that I should be doing. So I think when I found that I needed to compartmentalize a little bit, that really helped. Letting emails be in my work email box on my phone and not checking them as soon as one pops in, making time later to check those if I'm not in the office is okay. Or asking somebody else who is actually in the office or working to do it. is okay. So delegating and letting the people on call when you're not on call do things has been a big step for me. Just focusing on home and focusing on work or exercise or going to see a movie by myself. So all those type of things, just, switching gears into Kari the mom, the wife, the homemaker type thing mode is just essential. As I stated before, chefs, cooks, etc. work 110 hours a week sometimes. We drink a lot of coffee, energy drinks. A lot of us are smokers. There's a lot of drug use and alcoholics. Does the funeral industry have this problem as well? I think every business is going to have its segment that is dependent on different things. I definitely know quite a few funeral directors who do have alcohol problems and have burned themselves out really early in their careers, who have some serious health problems because of how they lived up to an earlier age. So everybody makes a choice on how they're going to live, and I think some people blame it on their career, they blame it on situations, but we choose what we do to ourselves and what we put in ourselves. So I don't think we can blame the career, but we definitely have long days where there's days I drink more coffee than I probably should or ever want to, but I do need a little pep in my step. I think that you can't focus and do the job functionally if you're going down certain paths, though, because you have to be so alert to so many fine details. But I do know people who have struggled with some serious demons, and addiction is a disease, and at a point you don't have control and choice. I know that for sure. So it's a big question, because I think, just like I said, in any business, you're going to find people that are on that wrong path, for sure. I know that death certificates and permits must be signed prior to burial. What if you have a body that is their religious beliefs to be buried within 24 hours before sundown and you don't have the papers signed? How do you go about this? So not every state requires a death certificate signed prior to burial. Most of the time, we do not have a death certificate signed prior to burial in my area. So it just takes doctors a little longer. I think if you live in a state that is required, the doctors, maybe they're trained better. I know that's the wrong word, but maybe they're more used to signing things more efficiently in a timelier manner. Some places you can't bring the body into the care of the funeral home until a death certificate's signed. So it all depends on the laws and the rules of the state and the area that you're in, whether that happens or not. But I know that we can facilitate burial by sundown and all of that very easily where we are. This is a great question about pre-planning. I'm in my mid-30s, and after watching your videos, I've decided to pre-plan my own funeral. Awesome. And pre-plan the funeral for my family. So if I pre-plan my son's funeral now, 6 years old, and he lives to be in his 90s, will the pre-plan still be in effect 80 years later? So the future of funeral directing, goodness, in 90 years, what's that going to even look like? If we have all these disposition options now, what's even going to be there in that many years? It could be crazy. So, his choice of what he wants could completely be changed. You definitely can start a plan that you go back to maybe every 5 years. And then when he turns 20, turn that over to him and say, listen, every 5-10 years, or as your situation changes, you need to go in and touch base. Now, if that funeral home goes away, just have copies of the file and go to a new funeral home and say, hey, our funds are with such and such trust or such and such life insurance. We just want to start a new file with you. Because that money is not with the funeral home, it's with that third party trust or insurance, whichever you choose to put it in. So that money is always going to be there until you cash it in. So make it an option that he can then go later. Let him know about it when he's older, so he can go and make changes to it. And when he gets to the point of being married and having children, he can update and he can keep things moving forward and just keep it current. I think that's the most important thing, is keeping things current. It is against my religion to be cremated. So if I die young, like before 65, I want my heart cremated and made into a diamond for my wife, and vice versa. Is it only possible to cremate a single organ but not the entire body? You can. However, the heart is not going to produce cremated remains to make a diamond from. Cremated remains are from the solid bone structure that is left after all the soft tissue is burned away. So the heart is burned away and it's gone because of the heat volume and the heat index that's used. And you need like a quarter cup, I think it is, to compact down into a diamond. So it's a beautiful thought and sentiment, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately, to have that done. So we have life insurance and we have a policy for every dependent in our household to pay for a pre-planned funeral with life insurance. If so, how do you do that? So some insurances you can sign over to the funeral home in a way. Some states allow it, some companies allow it. Your best bet is to go to the funeral home and start a policy with them for the amount towards what it is you want. Because at that point you lock in the costs of the funeral home as well, and so that's going to save you a lot in the long run too. So you can have your policy at home, but if you get to the point that you have to spend down to go on state aid, you're going to lose that money because they'll make you cash it in. If it's with the funeral home, you do not have to. So that's the beauty of pre-funding and pre-arranging with the funeral home, is you have just the money that you need locked into an insurance policy or a trust to go towards what it is you want, and that money can be sheltered and saved for just your funeral if you do have to go on state aid. Sheltered is the wrong word because they don't want you to do that, but it is made safe and locked in with that funeral home if you need to go on state aid. So I would recommend going to a funeral home. Even if it's not the one you choose down the road, you at least have started with a funeral home, and you can always transfer it to a different one if you move to a different area or you end up not liking that funeral home for some reason, but you can always have that as an option. Someone dies and wants to be put on a pyre and set on fire or pushed on a lake, then have a flaming arrow shot at it. Is this legal? So the only legal funeral pyre in the country is in Utah. Now I'm second guessing my thought. I believe it's Utah. And the only people that can use it are the people that live in the community who got it legalized and have it in their community. So I see in the future that more options like this are going to become legal over time, but it takes time to make big changes. Just like water cremation has taken a long time to get even to the point it's at, and it's still not legal everywhere. So making new disposition and new service options available to people takes a long time, and for a reason. I mean, if we had people just lighting bodies on fire everywhere, there's a lot of drugs inside bodies nowadays, and there's a lot of things that it might become problematic. If you're worried about chemicals going back in water sources, but you want to burn up a body out on a lake and let it just go in the water, well, body parts might not all burn. So then you have a foot fall into the bottom of the lake, and then later on somebody finds a foot, and then they're like, oh, is somebody buried in the lake? And, it causes problems. So there's a lot of factors, like those little things, like the foot at the bottom of the lake, that you have to think about, because it's going to have to be regulated somehow because of those type of things. It's not because it needs to be controlled by somebody and somebody's power tripping. It's because you have to look at the things that could go wrong and the liabilities behind it, and somebody has to take on those liabilities. Say ashes from that funeral pyre go and they burn down a house, who's responsible for that? So those secondary factors need to be looked into and planned for before you can make those things accessible to everybody. I know that the family has the final say as far as disposal of a body. Is it common to go against the wishes of the person that died because the family wanted something else? Let's say I want my heart cremated and I'm adamant. Can the next of kin override it? So for something like that, we would need to have approval signed in order to remove something from the body. And we would also have to have the family sign to cremate a body part. And so we would have to have the family's authorization to do those things. Even if you had a will written that you wanted it done, we have to have signatures from everybody in order to authorize it. Now, you could designate in some states somebody else to oversee your final disposition and to oversee your whole funeral. So you could choose Joe Schmo to come in and do that all for you, and then your family has no say. It depends on the state. Every state does not have this designation form that you can do. So trust your family, or if you don't trust your family to follow out your wishes, look into whether your state has the designation form or not, so that way you can have things carried out. But like in Michigan, if you want to be cremated and your family doesn't want you to be, if you haven't filled out the designation form for somebody else, you're not getting cremated, because you cannot sign that form for yourself ahead. It has to be after the death. Somebody has to sign those forms. So the family is then the ones that have to do it. I know it's a pretty unfair situation for many people if they really want something, but there's not somebody to carry it out for them, which is why they came up with those designation forms. So, well, thank you for all these questions. As always, I'm always blown away by the depth of some of the questions, and a lot of these are, this is my situation and this is what I'm thinking. Is this okay? Can I do this? And so many of you go through life wondering, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do, but can I? Or is this even an option? So ask away, post them below, connect with me. If you want immediate answers on anything, send me an email at Kari@karinorthy.com. I try and get to as many comments as possible, but I don't get to every one of them. So shoot me an email and I will get back to you within 2-3 days for the most part. So thanks for watching. Keep the questions coming and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.